First of all, I think the best thing to do is maybe I would talk for 15 minutes or so, and then I would love if you would ask questions, participate. Don't feel that I'm this strange Vietnamese up here talking, out of his fanny, so to speak. But let me give you a nice joke that I learned recently. I collect jokes because that's how you, when you're a foreigner, you acquire the assertive language. What is written on an atheist tombstone? Anyone? All dressed up but nowhere to go. Isn't that fantastic? Other than that, I don't know what actually shaped a person, what actually formed a person. I can't tell you what actually shaped me to who I am today, doing what I do. But I would try my best to sort of give you a few narratives, perhaps. But I won't repeat them again, because I don't know how to repeat. One of my terrible weaknesses, actually. But I can tell you, let's say, 2 episodes. When I was very young, one was a week before the New Year's Day. New Year's in Asia, especially in Vietnam, is a very big celebration because it's a collective celebration with everyone who just turned a year older, essentially. And then one came to an end in New Year's Day. So the first one was told by my father about the story of Karl Valentin, who was an essential figure during the Weimar Republic in Germany in the 20s, leading to maybe the tail end of that decade, who was a cabaret performer, who was a film producer, a writer. I knew of him through the story my father told me was more or less a metaphysical clown. The story about him dressing up like a beggar, a homeless man really, walking profusely on the stage, especially around the proscenium front where the lights are, in complete silence for a good 10 minutes. And the backdrop was a park at night in 3 a.m. And then finally, there was a policeman up here, and he asked him, what are you doing in 3 a.m. in the park? He said, I lost my keys here. So the policeman offered his help. Let me help you. So the two of them walked around in silence for a good 10 minutes. Valentin was known to be the master of gallows humor. Some even regard him as a linguist anarchist. So the two of them walk around in silence, where the lights are, around the edge of the stage. And finally, the policeman stopped him and said, you sure you lost your keys here, sir? He said, no, I lost my keys over there, pointing the dog to the audience. And then the policeman said, why not looking over there then? He said, there's no lights over there. And it stayed with me. It bothered me. And I kept saying to myself, I'm going to look for my keys, wherever cost it would take. I would go there even I step on dog poop, Scary, frightening in the dark. I remember saying that to myself as a 10-year-old. And then New Year's Day came, huge family gathering, cousin, nephews, uncle, aunts, and their families, and very divided political family that I grew up with. Half is very devoted to Ho Chi Minh to the north, and the other half have learned what happened to the Moscow trial, what Stalin did with his friends and comrades. So they were more invested in the American support of the South. I was telling, actually, Michael, Cody, and Ian earlier about that, having grown up, that incredible division of the family. Give me the strength to do what I do with the rail, because I have friends who are incredible enemies to each other. Okay, why I'm telling you this story, because it led to my grandmother to the end of that day. And she held my hand, walked me through the back of the house, looking across the far distant mountain and say, "You know, grandson, when you grow up, you will suffer like anyone else's. And don't ever think once that your suffering is more unique than theirs. But make sure that you suffer the right way." And I have no idea what that meant. But I know it has substance. It has a nice resonance. And however long it takes me, I vow to myself, I'm going to try to figure out ways that would come close to that meaning, what she had said there. And that's how it happened in a way. And I'm going to skip a lot of biographical narrative because in some way it's too dramatic. I learned to chill, cool down things a little bit lately. So what I would like to do is maybe show you guys a few images and then we'll open the discussion. Basically, the way that the rail got started, it began with having been to Williamsburg in the late 90s. There was an incredible favorite scene in the few galleries there. A lot of friends were showing in various places, even, artists run galleries. But I always found it extreme frustrations talking to my friends, meeting people who, if you took them out of their so-called field of interest, they are lost. They would make terrible dinner companion. In other words, a film gender of 1960 to 73 doing his or her own doctoral dissertation can really barely talk about Baroque art. Or some artists can't even know, who don't even care for poetry. And that really frustrated me a lot. And I would argue with them, they would argue with me. And finally, I realized, wait a minute, there was a Vietnamese proverb that goes, when you argue a smart person, you can't win. But when you argue a stupid person, you can't stop. So I realized this is a fantastic way to get them, bring them together so they can appear in the same printed pages. So roughly about October, I think, beginning of October, I saw a painting for 2000. And I wanted to put that forth in the paper. Even though the rail have its own early reincarnation in the form of a pamphlet. It's essentially a paper, the sheet of paper that is 8 by 11. You fold it into half, so there appear 4 columns. And I was just the enthusiast pamphleteer. I would be very early in the morning at the L Train Cafe by Bedford Avenue stop, handing out those pamphlets. Then was no more than 14 people going to work. In October 2000, that it's just barely turned into paper. As opposed to today, you can't even walk the sidewalk in Williamsburg. It's jam-packed every morning. As some of you who've been to New York knew that, overpopulation of all the region in Williamsburg, and even further at Queens now. So I don't know what's happening in New York, frankly. So the rail started in the same month that I began to make my first site-specific installation, and it was entitled Homage to Tatlin. Because I studied art history in college a little bit and found the Russian constructivists very compelling in that they were able to went through the evolution of Cubism from analytical to synthetic Cubism, and then something beyond that, especially Malevich. But I was interested in Tatlin because there was a political component to the work. So this was the first attempt trying to unify the rectilinear relationship of straight line. In other words, it's simple as the fundamental differences. When you draw a curved line, it alludes to nature, natural form, organic form. But when you put a straight line on its own independent autonomous present, it's just a straight line. So in order to create form, you had to put many of them, join them together. So that's how this came about. And I felt it was important to begin the paper in October because partly I'm a very close reader of October magazine. I'm friends with Rosalind Krauss and a lot of her friends on the paper. But I want to create October for all the people's October, without, as you mentioned, compromise the content. As though someone asked me lately, what's the ultimate aim of the Rail? Who reads the Rail? And I'm always saying the same thing, those that read. But it does have a little bit of what appeared to be a synthesis New York Review of Books and maybe the Village Voice in the old days. That was the intention. But what also essentially important for me, working the Rail with other friends, is that you immediately could feel the age of the writer, whether he or she starting out at 22, 23, or someone else is just done his or her graduate thesis and more. And they're also very well-known people who occasionally would join in and write the Rail, like the way that certain scholar and art historian are beginning to doing this rotation at Critic every month, which I will I will definitely talk about that in a minute. But let's see if what we have surprised here. So this is the first issue of the Rail. This terrible echo. Is that okay with you guys? I can hear echo. Should we turn it down a little bit?
I can't hear it.
It's okay? Could you hear okay? Okay. So this is the first issue of the Rail, October 2000, and you can see the echo of Russian constructivists in design, even the bold fonts of the logo. And this is actually Bedford Avenue, North 9th Street in 1998. So you see how it transformed quite rapidly after the following 4 or 5 years or so. Here's another view of that installation. Basically, the idea is to site-specifically install the work, and then after it comes to the end of the show, it will get destroyed. And I like that fact, the notion of construct and destruct. Here's one of many studies for each installation. I think I've done probably about 8 at this point. So what happened, some point, I think there was this predicament of trying to do too much, and I don't know how to reconcile it. I really don't, but I remember reading Isaiah Berlin's wonderful essay. For those of you who haven't read it, please make an effort to read it. It's really informative as far as how certain temperaments get built, get constructed, and knowing who you are as far as the so-called hedgehog or the fox was extremely useful to me. In other words, it came from a fragment from a greater, longer poem by Archilochus, a Greek poet. The phrase goes, the fox might know many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. It's a first attempt, I think it was written in 1955, first attempt to differentiate the temperament of those who can mediate the world from all kind of perspective, all kind of angle, but could only filter through one singular vision. And then those who have scattered, diffused minds, to whom the world cannot be boiled down to one singular reading, interpretation. And I think Berlin went on and gave 2 examples that demonstrate these 2 kind of artistic and intellectual differences or temperament. He thought that Plato, Lucretius, Dante, Hegel, Pascal, whereas Herodotus, Aristotle, Erasmus, Molière, Montaigne, Pushkin, Goethe for sure, Balzac, and Joyce are foxes. How do I put this in terms of the art world? I guess you can propose that someone like Bob Ryman is a classic hedgehog, where someone like Richter is a fox. In fact, there was a story when my friend Robert Stewart was doing the show Richter at MoMA. He drove to his studio in Cologne, and they have a marvelous lunch, and he say, you know, there's a Bob Ryman show in Dusseldorf. Maybe we should go there to see it. And Richter say, let's just skip lunch. I admire the work. Let's just get on the car and drive there. It's 2 hours ride. But any time that Richter's name mentioned, which I have to Bob, he pretended he never heard of the man's name. Completely disinterest. Very interesting. So that's a good example. And then some point, I think I read a wonderful phrase by Anna Catherine Green. Some of you might remember her as one of the first writer of American detective fiction of the 19th century. The phrase goes, those that work because the spirit is in them, and they cannot be silent if they would. And those that speak from the conscientious desire to make apparent the beauty to others that have awakened them. And I realized that I somewhat came slowly to identify with the latter. So whether I'm writing, editing, whether I'm curating, whether I'm working with the editorial staff, going to many endless meetings of foundation boards, total 7 at this point, or spending time with artists in his or her studio, it's all part of that productive unity. I never felt one was more important than the other. It's all somehow makes sense to me that is what the given task that I'm currently doing, all of it. So Betsy Baker, I guess, who's known as a legendary editor of art in America for 37 years, she was a guest editor of, I think, September issue 2013. And the theme was interesting. It's about what is new, what's new. Arguing that if historical memory is something completely perceived as disinterest among younger generation, would moral value, would innovation, which was so essential to early decades, even began with modernism, would that be proven to be an effective condition, creative condition for younger artists? Because they freely reappropriate, they freely spin and make their own, I would say, outcome from taking all sources from photography, from painting, collage, from performing video and whatnot. I thought that was an incredible, generous gesture that Bessie did. I believe that it was one of our most popular editorial. It was initiated in February 2013 because I felt it was important to keep the Rail editorially surprised. So whoever get invited in every month rotation is entitled to his or her own subject matter, what is currently fresh in his or her own mind, which they've been talking among their friends. So they would bring their friend to participate in that editorial section for that month. And that's how it began, and it's still going. And I find it extremely refreshing and surprising to me, as well as to other people that we are working with in the Rail. Here is a portrait of John Elderfield, who I spoke to in 2010, I think, there was that great Matisse show. Some of you may have seen it. It's called Radical Invention, focused particularly in the year of 1913 to 1917. It was a very crucial year after the outbreak of the First War because Matisse, who you know, came to become an artist rather late in his life, having been a law student and lawyer, actually. He didn't really undertook his career seriously until he was 32, 33. And so he's rather, I would say, late comer, as a late comer, much later than Picasso, although he's 8 or 10 years older than Picasso. I think it was a lot of catching up to do, a lot of anxiety that he had to deal with, first with overcoming Cézanne, especially the late methods of Cézanne. Some of you remember the great art historian, Roger Fry, who curated that wonderful show in 1910, I believe, where he included Cézanne, Gauguin, Van Gogh. I think Matisse was among them, and he coined the term post-impressionism, separating the different attributes that was more pronounced in the work, where not at all in the previous older generation of Monet, Manet, and Degas and whatnot. And it was, I remember reading somewhere quite recently that when D.H. Lawrence came early to the opening and was taken by Cézanne's apple, and he said, Cézanne's apple is like the moon because you could only see half the side. And I was thinking about how Matisse were able to overcome that anxiety, that period, with the late Cézanne, but then he had to deal with Picasso, you know, as a young painter who came on the scene. By 1913 or so, he already had gone to his analytical cubist phase. So now he undertook the synthetic phase. So Matisse was dealing with Cézanne and Picasso as well as trying to reach his own maturity at that period. So it was a learning experience for me. And part of the thrill is to talk to artists and scholar, art historian, curate, and whatnot. And that's the process that I still find it extremely exciting, as I am to do today. Just actually interview Alfred Leslie 2 days before coming here, who's now 88 years old. You remember Pull My Daisy, that great film with Robert Frank? Well, he was a filmmaker too, as well as a painter. His friend Leibowitz, who have a great love for smoking cigarettes, reading books profusely every day, 4 or 5 hours a day, but she doesn't quite write in the last 2 decades or more because she's experienced this perpetual writing block, and she has serious perpetual contempt of children. Don't ask me why. But it was funny to have spoken to Fran. She retold story of how desperate she was coming to a 24 hours during read, 3 in the morning to buy cigarette. And the woman behind the counter said to her, well, they on sale, you're very lucky. Her favorite brand being Marlboro Lights. And she said, why should it be on sale? Heroin is not. You know, I mean, I'm addicted person, and addiction should be charged more. Anyway, the point is that she was very funny, extremely irreverent. So it was a pleasure to talk to. Here is a typical editorial meeting of the Rail. Joaquim Pizarro on the far left is the art editor of that month. I think the theme was about art, theory, and infancy. It's a collective effort to discuss whether theory is still a common subject or talk in academia and whether it's applicable in art making today. And often we have a lot of artists participate, sitting around the table. Here is Dorothea Rockburn. I think Irving Sandler is somewhere here. Here's Alex Bacon, a young scholar, and Gray Lindquist, Carol Rooney, and there's more. It's about 40, 50 people smooshing in that little room. This is the old office of the Rail. We have a new one in Sunset Park, which I hope I have some images to show you. Or all the time where panel discussion would be taking place on a certain gallery. In this instant is a panel which I moderated on the work of Harvey Quaitman, who's actually the father of R.H. Quaitman, and that's a product of also Susan Howe, who's coming tomorrow. Or it's next week, Michael? Okay, the poet Susan Howe. And here on the left is Dory Aston, Rebecca in the middle, Ron Workshop in the far right. And I think somewhere is Eva Landbohr sitting here, but it's not in the picture. Another example of a panel discussion, this might have been at Hunter College. So I love organizing panel discussion, and I hope that you will raise some questions because it's about dialogue, and it's not enough in the classroom. That's important too, but I think in this context, that's why I'm so committed in doing more talk when I can, meeting new people, figure out what's going on in the world, because the rest of the world is a disaster. It's all about killing people, bombing all the culture. Like I remember as a kid growing up in Vietnam and suffer that terrible political conflict. So I really not interested in politics much. I'm aware of it, but my energy is invested in art and culture. Occupy Rail is about art and culture, not politics and money. A good example of my curatorial effort is one here, when Paul Kasmin refused to pay for a work of art transported to the show I did 2 years ago, Come Together Sandy. I think I have some images to show you, but it was a visceral response. Everything I do is based on that immediacy, how I react to the space or the certain kind of spontaneous, unexpected condition. I was taking the N train to meet Paul for lunch, and the blood red, flame red color, and bumblebee yellow happened to be the passenger color, the seats of the N train. And previously to this show, there was a show curated by, I think it was by Vincent Fremont. It's a historical show of works, mostly surrealist works, painting and sculpture, that Alexander Yolas have built for Mrs. de Menil in the museum in Houston. And I remember reading about Yolas, who had, before becoming a dealer, he was a ballet dancer. And he used to make remark about preparing a show, an exhibition. It's like preparing a ballet where the viewer is regarded as dancer and the work of art is decorated by artists. So this is what I did. I wanted the installation to be immersive, and I want the viewer to have two providing surface. One is high, which is the platform built, which also below the high line, and the soft surface, which is stacked, evenly covered with hay. At the opening, people sneeze like crazy. And they were very tentative, walking slowly on both surfaces. And actually, as a result, it prolonged their viewing experience. That was so fascinating. And they came back and see more. I think I don't know how to do it anymore with white wall and white cube, you know? It's been explored so many times, so many ways, so brilliantly by so many people. I just don't know how to add more to that given. Here is a dance commission performance. Often when I curate, I'm always trying to bring in the poets, the dancer, the musician. It's another way to, I guess, include what is possibly all the things that appear in the rail. One of the things that I learned from the get-go was the poet, the writers often don't have the means. And since the separation of all the different field of discipline from the 70s, I knew right away the resource had to come from the visual arts. There's more foundation, more grand, make it into the visual than really writer and poets. So I always wanted to make sure they're always a presence of poetry reading, dance performing, or music and whatnot. So this is one of the agreement from the very beginning that I asked for the other activities to be included in the show. Here's another view of her dancing. Daniel Martinez piece in the back, which was essential for the show. You might recognize this fellow right there. Have you ever seen Calm's report on YouTube? That's James Calm. He's everywhere. And it's interesting because he started out being an artist late. He was in the Vietnam War. I think he was in the Marine. Came back and became an artist, and he had this amazing appetite for art history. So he started writing for the Rail, and all his writing early on until 2006, I would say. He came at the same time with William Pauhida, and how all that history became part of the work. So now all his work is about map of different artists, plays, locales in New York, in Brooklyn, and where else. Very interesting artist. James Calm, but his real name is Lauren Monk. M-U-N-K. Okay, I see I'm going to move quickly. This is Berezovsky, who's known as the critic of the nation, but also a terrific poet. So he was among of the 4 commissioned poets who were asked to write 4 poems in response to the show. And this is the view that he's reading his poem. A show recently I did last year at Red Bull Studio, which was Hideous Space. It was curved wall, and it's all painted black. And it was built with the intention to provide a high-tech music facility. But when I went to the men's room, I realized there was an acidic yellow-red color, and I snuck into the women's room. It's the same acidic fluorescent red. And I decided to come out and say to Max Wolf, who invited me to do the show, okay, I'm going to do a show for you, but it has to be a theme of psychedelic culture. Let's say we're going to make into an equivalent of a set for the next Austin Power movie film. And that's exactly what happened here. I basically called up Jim Lambie, who has not shown at all in New York since 2009 show that Ann Tamkin did at MoMA. It's called Color Chart. So I asked him whether he would do the floor piece, which was a tricky situation because Jim never really did a show where he allowed all the artists sitting on top of his piece. So it took a few days of negotiation, and finally it happened. Similar to the other show, you can see a lot of so-called call and response in contrast. For instance, this is Ugo Ronlinone, massive head, very incredible heavy texture, as opposed to most delicate, smooth surface of Rona Pondic, head in the tree. So I'm always very conscious of making that subtle contrast, or not subtle at all. Here is a view of a wonderful artist who only began to be an artist 4 years ago. His name is Peter Limbaugh Wilson. Otherwise, some of you might know him as Hakim Bey, a very well-known anarchist writer. He wrote a book in 1991. It's called TAZ, T-A-Z, which stands for Temporary Autonomous Zone. It's a very important book for me. It talks about the potential application of things, or so-called the in-between space, before the structure would collapse on them. I'm interested in that very much. Actually, I was talking to Cordy earlier, because partly I'm interested in keep moving constantly, not just being surprised, not because I came late to identify myself as a fox-like temperament, not a hedgehog, But I think partly because of the way the world turns so fast today, that's the only condition that I can mediate myself. How I able to get things done in the way that I felt could only happen, for instance, when the day, a certain time of the day where you couldn't tell a wolf from the dog. And I'm interested in that boundary when things are being blurred. Sometimes very subtly, sometimes not at all, sometimes very overt. So this is, let me see if I show you a few more views. Here is another good example of Lisa's Jaskevich on the right. Deep space, full of illusionistic framework, almost like the Kiriko. And Tanguy on the left is Peter Saul for raccoon making Pollux all over painting, which is about automatism. So I think the kind of shallow space, deep space is an obvious comparison here. Here's Chris Martin looking for mushroom. Here is a wonderful minute sculpture of Charles de Dre, Will Ryman, Infinity. A room was covered with the bottom of sneaker of children from the age of 8 to 11, I think. It's a very subtle political implication. We were hoping to do that in a bigger incarnation, but I don't know if it's going to happen or not. In any rate, this is the bottom of the show, and you can see that I decided to create light from the bottom up and cover with pink carpet. Children loved it. I never seen so many mothers and fathers came with their children and they play on the floor, on the carpet. It was insane. It was such an ecstatic, fun thing to do with this show. Here's a panel discussion with Fred Tomasali. I think that's Deborah Cass here. And this is Errol Morris' younger son. You probably have read some of his writing on the Atlantic about being a guinea pig, being sent everywhere, especially Latin America, country, Peru, the Amazon, to take drugs and would write about it. He's kind of a genius guy. He's only 24. Here's another show that, I mean, it was 2 years ago. Come Together Sandy. This is an incredible backdrop that was contributed to a cause for Sandy in Red Hook. I think it was organized by Dustin Yelin and Bosco Sodi, just right in front of Cordy's room actually. But I don't know, I have an image of Cordy. But here's another instant of music performance. It's Will Epstein and Nicholas Shaw. This is all children of artists, so it's very interesting. Another view of Sandy's show, a young sculptor named Joe Nicogosian in front of Alex Cass, kind of nasty green ocean. Ron Warchop, A Room for Him, terrific artist, quite overlooked. He only began to be appreciated, I would say, 4 or 5 years ago. Ron had a famous, he's known in the art world being the most difficult person to work with. So no dealer touches him. Hello. But someone is doing it now, so I'm very happy. Dance performance, commission for the show. Poetry reading, John Newman, you're going to have a show here somewhere. Is right in front. Chris Martin on the back. And the subtlety, where I talked about earlier, having to do in this instant with the color, red, yellow. So sometimes it's very minute. But for me, it comes so naturally. So I always able to create that so-called call and response relationship. Here is the great Marianne Cause, being the guest editor. I think it was last May. One of the great surrealist translator, poetry of Pierre Verdi and René Char. She also wrote an amazing book on Joseph Cornell. So this is another so-called editorial meeting. I think that's Amy Wallace, Sophie Oakley, who is the manager of Bruce High Quality Foundation. Here's Barry Swarovski again. So we always have it on monthly basis, and this instant is specifically on the art scene section. Another my crazy installation. I don't have time to do anymore, which is extremely sad, but I should get back to it. I hope one day I will. I'm going to skip many things because I think my assistant put too many images. There's no need to talk about all these things. This is the paper that I grew up with in our home, Humanité. We end with this so-called potential social sculpture. These are images of my portrait. Whoa, it's going very fast. What happened? Why is it here? All right, there must be a mistake, but I don't care. Wait a minute, can we put it back? How do we do it? That image is actually very intense. That what you saw there is a painting that is barely this big. It's maybe 17 inches square by Albert Bingham Ryder, a great American painter from the 19th century, even though he died in 1917. Jackson Pollock was asked, who is his favorite American master? He said, the only American master I admire is Albert Bingham Ryder. And what you saw there, a painting in the mat, it's called Moonlight Marine, which took him 20 years to paint. It's intense. The surface is so thick, and there's this incredible luminosity of immensity space that evoke in this incredible silhouetted black sailboat. Again, this equally dense sea below. I didn't mean to show this, but may as well talk to you about the work. Because Pollock, actually, great painting, Autumn Rhythm, number 30, is also the mat. I realized one time I was walking around without an agenda. This is the best way to go to a museum, when you have no agenda, when you're supposed to have a date. The great thing about New York, two things. When you drive to the city and you can find a space to park. The second thing is when you're supposed to have dinner with someone and it's canceled. And I think it's one of those instances was canceled, so I decided to go to the museum without an agenda. I walked in and I just realized that Pollock's ultimate aim is to, however big, monumental the size he needed to paint his painting, the ultimate aim is to express that incredible sense of intimacy. It's as though Ahab understood what required that complete calmness before he gets swallowed by the whale, you know? Whereas Ryder, whose size is so tiny, able to generate that sense of immensity, is the opposite. I feel like that should be a show, don't you think? And I think that's somehow tied up to, again, my grandma. I never get along with my father, but it's grandma. So if I can say who I am today, it's definitely because of grandma. She also say this remarkable thing. She say, if you live in a long tube, be thin. If you live in a barrel, be round. And I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to figure out how to go about daily routine without being repetitive. And I felt that's how I perceive Cody's installation here, because I have seen the previous incarnation, I think, at the gallery in New York, Zucker Gallery. Here it took on different form. So I would like to end by reading my so-called poem/review of Cody's show, The Installation in New York. I have to write a new one if I were to do it here because it's so different. I only started doing this only maybe a year and a half ago. Because I'm so busy that I can't always stay longer than an hour when I do reviews. So one day I decided, let's just go in there a good 5 minutes, look at the works, and just allow all those strange, unexpected references that float around me. References from psychoanalysis, philosophy, poetry, literature, art histories, whatnot. And then when it settled down in the next 5 minutes, I would write them down, and without edit at all, I would write home and just fix up comma, colon, semicolon here and there. But essentially what I wrote, exactly how it's intended to be. So here is one for Cordy's called Chimera 45. Its space between the endless concentric squares, preferred to its diamond configuration, recalls the mitre maze that we travel through into leisure. Lit from above, below, it glows from the opposite like the internal fires of Chimera with a dazzling spectrum of fluorescent orange, merlot, burgundy red, seductive lipstick red that provoke fuchsia, and baby pink. An optical sensation prompted by the occasional brush marks, drips in various permutations, detectable flecks of premium wood glue, Tibon number 2, D1, B2, C1, to whomever is counting this maddening geometry. Imperfect declaration of Pacific architect who refuses to calculate properly. Moreover, a known possessor of the 2x4 and the undisputed master of the chop saw. Judiciously, he calibrates muscular consumption. In rough 45 ghost, traces of HB pencil lines are left undisturbed as if the intended elevation for rough 45 will soon to be delivered at 4:30 p.m. Smudges, screw holes, coarse thread drywall screws, emphatic scratch that lift the falling weight of avalanche of a voracious family of 2x4s who have skipped one too many steps on the steep staircase. My wife say she prefers yellow clacker caps. Someone else shouts, I can only spare 5 equal eye screws from my toolbox. How unfortunate that I never got to play with him when we were children. Buta Bit Verb and Buta Bit Rouge have given up their Delphic geometry to Beta Plan 1. From Bernard's handsome Rizzoli monograph of Prague, prominently resting on single bookshelf, to late-night analytical cubist exercise, 2 a.m. knuckles. We all know lots of things have happened there in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Around the corner, Frank's knot is someone else's bicycle wheel that becomes a moon spinning to its own speed. 13 years from now, Dark Star will be welcomed into his vast orbit. No one remembers what he was like in 1994. Like the internal fires of Chimera in Lisha, the total environment is lit from within. Thank you. Autumn Rhythm. 9 feet tall, 16 feet long. Any question? About anything? How's the bug's eye doing? Okay?
When you were curating Surviving Sandy, which is, I think, one of the largest group shows I've ever experienced.
Oh, you went to see it?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
What was that like? Because it seemed more like, less like a curatorial process and more like artists just bringing their work. And I'm just curious what it was like to curate that show, given its subject matter, and it was sort of New York's response.
Yeah, it was, I was invited, first of all, by Jack Flam, who I knew as a student, when I was a student, as a Matisse scholar. So I knew about Jack. And he run the Daedalus Foundation, which is Robert Motherwell Foundation, who support the Rail, who gives the Rail funding. And I think John Elderfield's on the board. So it may have been John who suggested Jack that he should come to invite me whether I would do a show. Initially, it's only 15,000 square feet, which they have taken out for their storage space of Motherwell's work and archives. So I came, and everyone was there, you know. I think the whole staff, the foundation, some of the members were there, and the people from Industry City. So I jokingly coming away saying, listen, if you have more, you let me know. And this was 3 months before the show. So the fellow who was overseeing the whole project, the manager, so to speak, called me up and said, you know, I found more space. It's 75,000 more square feet. So it was total 100,000 square feet. It's insane. And we have less than 2 months and a half to execute. And mind you, it was completely raw space. So I went home that night, have a few drinks, you know? And I remember quickly, like, okay, should I do it or should I not? How insane am I, you know? And I remember, I think that's why story is so great. That's why you had to hang out with older people, your grandma, your grandfather, you know, uncle, or even some elderly people that you know. You just make an effort to go to them. So this story was told me by Maya Shapiro. It was a story that evidently was told by Oscar Wilde. It's about a murderer who was brought before the king to be pardoned. And before meeting the murderer, the king only had one eye. And because he's the king, he worried about his physical appearance, you know. So he commissioned a magician to craft an artificial eye, and it was done with great perfection. No one could tell the difference. So he looked at the murderer and said, you know, if you can tell which eye of mine is real, I will pardon you. And the murderer didn't even take time to look carefully. As soon as the king spoke, he answered right away. He said, the right one is your real eye, your majesty. And the king essentially freaked out. He said, yeah, you're right. But how do you know? He said, I know because that one have a glint of mercy in it. And I think occasionally in life, you have to learn how to trust that, you know. And I felt, I'm going to do it. What would be the worst thing happen to me? Get sent back to Vietnam, to labor camp? All right, I know I'm in the blacklist. Occasionally they check on me, especially late night talking to David Levi Strauss, people like that, or how can they? But I don't think I'm living in New York, you know, I think I'm okay. I'm somewhat protected. I have a lot of friends. So I feel like, okay, I'm going to do it, you know. And that's how it happened. We raised, they all agreed to pay for the renovation, build walls and the like. It's like $1 million, you know. And all the artists, works by Mark de Souvero, Richard Serra, Chuck Close, or even more bulky, heavy things, was paid either by the artists or their galleries. And that's how we did it. Very fast. And the idea is not to mourn the artists whose work were destroyed by Sandy. I think I visited 128 studios in a month and a half, sometimes 10 a day. Was it exciting? Yes. Was it fatiguing? Yes. It's like wolf and dog, you know? I was in that state. And was it fun? Absolutely. That's the key, actually, Michael. Fun. You have to have fun. If artists can sense that in what you do is about that, he or she would trust it, for sure. So that's how it came about. All the people who were involved in helping with the show was my graduate student. They just graduated. They didn't have any job. So it's a cool project. Everyone got paid. The Atlas Foundation was involved. Industry City were paying, providing all of those, what required in funding. So I think there was 28 students from Columbia and from School Visual and Hunter combined. They all work in there. Some of them was overnight curatorial assistant. They didn't go to bar curator study at all. Very cool. And some of them are now working at PS1. In fact, Peter Ely started with the Rail. So it's very interesting how all the things came together in the last minute. And I love it when you make that decision. Sometimes you just have to flip the coin too, you know, when you confuse, you know, head or face down. I'm going to dinner or not. Hello, did that answer your question? Okay. Any others?
I'm not sure this is a question.
Yeah. Hello, Anne. How are you?
I'm thinking about, so a couple of years ago, Rebecca Solnit was here.
Yeah.
And she talked about how that it's really important when you're young and when you're a student to fill yourself
Yeah.
with all those things that are going to sustain you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 30 years later when you're writing or making a painting or whatever. And, it strikes me that the Brooklyn Rail has, in that space, that has continued to kind of feed people in all sorts of ways, in ways that sustain efforts much later, or longer. I think Michael's introduction is partly referencing that. I can think of things that moved me.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge thing, to make a space that makes that possibility for so many other things to happen. So I have two questions. One is practical and really boring, probably.
But please.
Essential.
Yeah, please.
The economics of the paper. I think it's really interesting to hear about that. And then the other one is, what did you fill yourself up with? I mean, we've heard about all these literatures and subjects and the poetry and the stories, and it's such a rich weaving. This was a beautiful talk. But was there anything that you started filling yourself up with when you were a student that allowed you to then make the Brooklyn Rail?
Yes. Boy, thank you for the questions. And Anne is speaking from the heart. We haven't really done an interview with you. We had to do an interview with you, Anne. I admire your work. I felt...
I admire your work.
Well, the thing what happened, I think, some point in freshman year in college. Our family landed in Bucks County in 1980, and none of us spoke English. In Langhorne, Pennsylvania, where it's nothing but white people and deers. And then immediately, my parents did not want us to slacken behind, so we became a year older. And then I went to college immediately. I had to do all of it all at once. It was not easy. I was working also part-time. I was a musician, so I play a lot in different bands, and that paid partly through college. And then I was such a good student. And then they immediately gave me scholarship. But come back to that very beginning, that instant when I told the story about certain things where Joy would refer as everyday epiphany. You know, I had this marvelous older teacher, beyond retirement age. Her name is Jane Piper. In freshman year, you had to take elective class, you know. I was determined to work for Condé Nast. I was determined to be like Alexander Lieberman, because that's the person, that's a key person who I identify with. I want to be like him when I grow up. So cultured, so elegant. It's strange. Later I got to know him, and I'm friend with Sai Newhouse, you know. It's so odd. But I think it was Jane who said to me, you know, Phong, you seem to be so willful as a young person. You probably get to know to do what you want to do, I'm sure. But you have a temperament of an artist. If you ever change your mind, you call me up. And that's what happened to me. I think I graduated. I was, I think, #1 student. I won the first prize in the thesis show. I had appointment with Shemaiah and Gasmar. I have appointment with Hallmark car. They even flew me to Kansas City, took me to the Royal Games, you know, spent all night. I got really scared. Have you been to Kansas City Hallmark headquarters? Whoa, talk about cult-like community. So I didn't take that job, and I think I didn't even bother going to the third appointment, which is Condé Nast. I have an hour to kill, no agenda. I went to MoMA. And I think that's what happened. I think the Koonin painting, Woman 1, it was so ferocious and weird looking. And I remember I got goosebumps. And then when I got the goosebumps, I recall how Jane Piper told me, you ever change your mind, you call me. So I took all the coin I have in my pocket. I went to the public phone. I called her. Luckily, she was in the studio. And I said to her, hi, Mrs. Piper, it's Phong. You remember when you told me that? I said, yeah, I think I want to be an artist. But how do I go about it? She said, well, I know a friend of mine whose father used to be a painter I worked with as an assistant, Arthur B. Cars. And that friend's named Mercedes Matter, who founded this New York Studio School, which is now in A Street. Once was the original Whitney Museum. So that's how I sent there. It was a disaster. The school was weird. But at least you are in New York. I was in New York. As far as the economic of the paper and the great question, it's just constant struggle. Because everyone who wants to support you, they want to know what your mission is in life. It's like asking, you know how artists always hate to talk about his or her own work? I mean, we learn how to talk about it. But the truth is, we can't stand it. So when constantly people ask, so what's the mission statement of the Rail? I say, yes, it's the mission statement of the Rail is anti-mission statement. And that doesn't sit well with a lot of them. You know, so it's a struggle. How do you get support to keep it alive? I think it comes back to the artist community. They're the one who support the Rail. So that's what I'm doing. Jasper's Foundation, Corey's Father Foundation, the Warhol Foundation. I think Helen Franklin Toller Foundation is going to support. Richard Poussett Dot Foundation just got built, created, and they are committed to helping. And then I realized that, you know, I have to do more because I wanted to do the same for the poetry section, for the fiction section, for the dance, music, and whatnot. I have to do that more and more because the urgency of every city that have written to me, we now have Miami Rail, and with the third rail in the Twin City, and now we're going to working on Detroit Rail. I think that will be, if we succeed, and it will be phenomenal. Will be more famous than Brooklyn Rail because art is already there. And I think if you look back the history of artists, think of, let's say, Renaissance. The word Renaissance means rebirth. You remember Black Death, 1348, it wiped out half population of Italian population, remember that? Remember how only 40 years later in Florence, you would walk around on the flea market or outdoor market, you would run into Donatello, you would run into Gioberti, you would run in a tiny group of artists. Essentially, you have Brunelleschi and you have Gioberti, training artists, essentially. It's really tiny. And then you have Masaccio, Donatello. I mean, these are people who create the city, created the culture. This is what something de Kooning once said to me. I think it's so wise. He say, for milk to become yogurt, it needs culture. And I think all of us need to create that culture within ourselves. And I think the timing is right because New York-centric is over. I think the fact that we have to go to in New York to be artists is over. I think people in Detroit, essentially to me, is the only chance now that we have to give them the declaration of independence, the applause they need before the developer go there and marginalize them. Do you know what I mean? So I'm urging all my students to go there and buy property, create culture within themselves. I'm probably working with Mark de Souvrot because he want to create Socrates Park equivalent of that before he dies. So I think again, it's the artists who learn, who appreciate the rail, how it functions. And hopefully I'll be able to meet with Rauschenberg Foundation, so it's a struggle, and it's a struggle because, again, I don't want to make the rail into only an art paper. One of the ways that interests me so much about interview artists because it provides that history of how the artist came from where he or she came from with a certain background, and how they make a decision to be an artist. And some point, in spite of their struggle, they reach maturity that define what they are. There's certain kind of summation or synthesis of all of those things they've been trying forever. It makes sense pictorially, and then they sustain a career. Another form of struggle. And I think that evolution interests me. And when I'm interested, or anyone interested, I think it becomes interesting for people to read. And you have to, they can't fake that, As the Sobello used to say, interesting. Interesting. Isn't that interesting? He told me also another crazy joke. One day a man walked home, he opened the refrigerator and there was a rabbit sitting in there. And he said, "What are you doing in there?" Say, "I'm resting." Say, "Resting?" And the rabbit say, "Isn't it a resting house?" Yeah. Sorry, but it's Sobello who told the joke, It's pretty good. Maybe one more question, and then one more maybe. You guys so shy. Yeah.
I have met a woman named Carolyn Woodward who is involved in this big, you talked about artists coming together in the community and supporting the rail. And she has been talking a lot about artists coming together by property.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if you're involved with that, and it seems like a really wonderful renaissance of artists taking ownership again of property in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's not something you're involved with.
Well, Brooklyn is outsourced. It'll be hard to do it there. I think there are a lot of my students who moved to Philadelphia. So hopefully we're able to publish the Philadelphia Rail to help. Another thing that also interests me so much about the Rail, why I'm doing what I'm doing, because when I was a student, I was reading a great deal about history, writing about art criticism. How I came to understand about Manet through Baudelaire's reviews, you know, how I came to appreciate Cézanne's Apple through Maya Shapiro, how I appreciate Calum Greenberg when he at his best, when he's writing about Pollock. The argument of Pollock being someone who extend Manet late water lily, you know, was so beautiful, so marvelous. And I think that's why I'm invested in the Rail, as much as a document of an artist's life. I've been in some committee lately. I won't be able to tell you which one, but it's essentially involved with artists' works when the artist dies, where family may be not interested, maybe there's not enough money there to preserve the work, and it all depends on how much literature built around the artist. Because you know, some artists are very insane. Some point he or she decided, you know, I don't want to show my work, I don't want to deal with all the wear and tear requirement, what is maintain a career. I had this talk with Lee Bonteque actually, just before her show that Elizabeth Smith did, you know? And it's really amazing how some of them never thought about generating catalog when they have show. That is so essential. Essential, even when a friend who a writer, when you are broke, you don't have money, you can't pay someone to write essay, why not give a drawing? Believe me, they'd be happy to do it. I want documentation. I learn to appreciate it, because when you die, that's what counts. You know, the document built in the work, literature, an essay in the catalog, or somebody write a review. That, all of it is really important part of your, I hate the word legacy, but it is that. You know, so that's another way of thinking about it. But as far as, I don't know how to describe it. I think Detroit may be the first place that potentially, I don't know what happened to Philadelphia, because my recent friend, just killed herself recently. She was going to help funding it. We don't know. But definitely all throughout history, we know artists have done that. In fact, Franz Klein in 1948 say, artists live where dogs die. It's intense. But we know that, right? I mean, Montmartre, when Picasso was living with Braque, with Modigliani, with Passan, with Mutello, the so-called painting under the curse, they were extremely poor, very poor, impoverished condition. I mean, I think the whole idea of glamour surrounding the Parisian school is only emerged after the war, Second War, you know? And I think the same thing can be applied to New York during the Great Depression. Actually, I was talking to Ian and Cordy and Ulrich, you were on the table too, about New York during the Great Depression was a disaster. I mean, and yet there was great literature. There was partisan review. There was, before 2 years, being tied up with the John Reed Club. Partisan review could not be free from communist ideology because it was paid by John Reed. You remember John Reed, guys? 40 Days That Shook the World. Remember the film Red with Warren Beatty in the 80s? Anyone remember the film? And that's the first communist American who came to Soviet Union to be a communist, remember? All right, he was a kind of a cult figure in New York. So Partisan Review was an offering what then called Marxist Quarterly. These are journals that allow young intellectuals to write when in their 20s. Saul Bellow, Lionel Trilling, Maya Shapiro, Calum Greenberg, then Elizabeth Hardwick, you name it all. Everyone had their start in Partisan Review, and was luckily around 37, 38, I think, there was this marvelous well-to-do man, also an artist. They call him Park Avenue Cubist. His name is George L.K. Morris, who met William Ralph and William Phillips, two founding editors of Partisan Review, and they both expressed their financial struggle, and he said, you know, I'm going to help you guys. So that's what he did. He helped them the first 10 years. He paid for the printing costs and all that. All we need is just one or two cool, well-to-do people. I'm figuring that right now, because I think, do you know what I mean? The rest can be subordinate cast. That's good too, but the pillars, yeah, you just need, and I think how do you get those people excited so they can perform their civic duties? So talking earlier about our second office, which is not far from Cody's, he has a wonderful studio also in Sunset Park. Finally, we moved in there after the Sandy show, but I want to wait to see what these people are about, you know? So finally, we decided we move in, and we negotiated. All right, it's 10-year lease, and when you guys began to make money, I want you to build a residency, because I already am on the Marie Warshop Foundation board, which is a very cool residency, and I will do it. You build, you make your money, but I want you to give back. You need culture, you know that, because the Sandy show brought 60,000 people there, and it got something like 20-something reviews, you know? So I knew that, and I know having worked with David Volantis and Jane DeWy, they basically own Dumbo. So 2 years ago, well, you know, the Marie Warshop Foundation, a lot of funding, resource investment, which is based in Colorado Springs. Urban Sandler, Chuck Close, and I basically took them out for dinner and told them that in 3 years, we're not able to pay that $38,000 monthly rent. So would you consider to become partner? And I say to Jane, maybe you run the board with me, you know? And it will be fun. And they say, what an honor. Oh, that's so exciting. Thank you for thinking of us. So now all that rent is gone. So now it's called Sharp Golantis Foundation. Do you know what I mean? And I think if I can do that more, I'd be happy to. Even I have no private time. My wife is an artist, so that's cool. She doesn't care, you know? I'm lucky, very lucky. And the more we can do the rail, I think in every city, if it desire, I think it's the better. I think, but it has to, the desire has to come from within. You know what I mean? It has to come from within. Yeah, culture is not universal, it's local, and so is art. Hello, what, that's it? Does that answer your question? Okay. Can we have a drink? Is that okay? Okay, thank you guys. Thank you.